All right. Hello. Hey, good evening, everyone. Oh, it's kind of afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, my name's Deshaun Usher. I'm the Program Officer, Communities of Color at GLAAD. So on behalf of GLAAD, I would like to welcome you to our Black, Queer, and Unapologetic, the shifting lens of storytelling in Hollywood. So I'm so excited about today's amazing panelist and our moderator, and so I'd like to introduce our moderator, Danielle Moodie-Mills. Danielle is a cultural connoisseur and political junkie, bringing audiences the scoop on the resistance from Hollywood to Pollywood, which is Capitol Hill in DC. Weekday mornings on her radio television, Woke AF, daily, broadcast live on NDR Studios from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Woke AF Daily is one of NDR's and DCP's Entertainment's fastest growing progressive talk show in a newsine style that rings the alarm to the resistance and keeps audience up to speed on what they come to know in order to get woke and stay woke as F. So without any further ado, we'll welcome Danielle Moodie-Mills.
Thank you, Deshaun. I'm super excited to be here. It is my first Sundance, so this is very exciting to be here and doing this panel today. I'm gonna introduce our fabulous panelists one by one, and as I introduce you, please walk up to this stage. Of course, I would come here and get sick immediately after I got off the plane. Planes are flying Petri dishes, by the way. Okay, so first up, I would like to introduce Rashad Robinson, who is the president of Color of Change, a leading racial justice organization with more than 1.4 million members. Rashad is also one of my oldest friends.
No, I want to.
Okay.
The longest.
Yeah. Longest, oldest. Rashad designs winning strategies to build power for Black communities, moving prosecutors to reduce mass incarceration and police violence, forcing over 100 corporations to abandon right-wing policy shop ALEC, forcing corporations to stop supporting Trump initiatives and white nationalists. Bravo. Next up, we have Elegance Bratton. Is an award-winning director who began directing films as a U.S. Marine. His debut narrative, Walk For Me, debuted at 100 festivals worldwide, picking up a series of awards. His documentary feature, Pier Kids, follows 3 queer and trans homeless youth on New York City's iconic Christopher Street to show the intricate ways queer people of color utilize public space to build a chosen family. Next up is Justin Simien. Justin is a writer, director, and producer of both television and films based in Los Angeles. In 2014, he wrote and directed the feature film, Dear White People, which premiered at Sundance Film Festival. It streams on Netflix, and just launched your latest project, Bad Hair. Incredibly badass. Love. Next up, we have Jonica "Jojo" Gibbs, who is an actress and stand-up comedian based in LA. She is the star of the new series Twenties for BET. And then last but certainly not least, we have Alexandra Grey, who is an actress and musician best known for her role as Eliza Parks on the Amazon series Transparent. She recently joined the cast of the hit Fox musical drama series Empire. Super exciting. Does everybody have their mics? Is everybody comfortable?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to start off with bad news because, I like to set context for why we're all here. For the first time ever, and this is something that I think was incredibly startling to me, and so I don't know if everybody knows it, so I like for folks to be aware. For the first time ever, acceptance of LGBTQ people has been trending downward. The numbers of Americans ages 18 to 34 who are comfortable interacting with LGBTQ people slipped from 53% in 2017 to 45% in 2018, and is the only age group to show a decline. So we often hear the idea that, all of the homophobes and transphobes and racists, like they'll all die out. That's not the case. Apparently they're multiplying. Some other alarming stats that we have, which are 36% of young people said they were uncomfortable learning a family member was LGBTQ, compared with 29% in 2017. 34% were also uncomfortable learning that their doctor was LGBTQ versus 27% a year earlier. And 39% were uncomfortable learning their child had a school lesson on LGBTQ history versus 30% in 2017. So I'm gonna open up with a question for all of you, which is that as a society, we have placed a lot of our hopes and dreams on young people, and yet the polls are suggesting that their acceptance is on the decline. What do you think should be done to encourage more storylines that feature Black LGBTQ characters, as well as conversations on gender identity, sexual fluidity, and what it means to be queer? So I'm gonna throw this out first in Elegance, and then we'll go down and then up.
It's really harrowing numbers to hear.
Yeah.
I was unaware of that. I think the most important thing that has to be done, regardless of whether or not, I mean, first of all, you know, it's a hard life, and not everyone's gonna like you. And we've spent the last 50 years bending over backwards so that people will like us, and it has not worked. So perhaps this is the time to be more defiantly queer and more different than we've ever been before, because I always call it like the Jane Goodall strategy, you know, like, we're so like you, we're gay, but we're just like you. And nobody believes that. So rather than prioritizing some sort of notion of like, you know, kind of mainstreaming ourselves to fit into certain boxes, perhaps it's time to be even more radical and more, you know, just determined to be our full selves, regardless of what people think of us, you know? Because you can only, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I think the gay rights movement has fallen for a lot of things in the last 50 years that have not equaled progress. And then in terms of Hollywood itself, we need more queer makers of color. You know, who better to speak to our existence than ourselves? And very often this is an art form where we privilege the idea that, you know, the true expression of cinematic empathy is someone who's from a different group commenting on someone else's group. And by virtue of doing that, they're supposed to lead by example for the culture on what tolerance is. Tolerance is not a goal. Tolerance is not something that I'm interested in, nor do I think is worth pursuing anymore. Because if all we're asking is for tolerance, clearly it's not working.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta echo that. You know, fuck trying to be what people need you to be to feel safe. You know, like, it's a survival strategy at a certain point. Like, you gotta do it because you gotta survive. And those numbers are really devastating. And those are my first time hearing them as well. But I think part of the problem is that it's the same problem that's always gonna be in America, is that the gatekeepers, the people who sort of control the narrative, you know, a lot of us can come out here making amazing personal films or expressing ourselves in all these ways, but the truth is that the capitalist gatekeepers who say this goes and this is promoted and this isn't, who sort of teach people how to watch the things that we're making, they're still in control and they're still spineless. And as much as they can relate one-on-one and like a mixer or a panel or something, at the end of the day, they go back to their, you know, to the people that they answer to, and they're still scared to take a stand. And so we have to stop waiting for them. That's part of the answer. And we have to become them, you know, is the other part of the answer. We have to infiltrate the empire. You know what I'm saying? That's a very dire and I guess pessimistic way to look at it. But I think it's the only answer I've got today, hearing those stats for the first time. I think not taking on other people's fear of how different we are is imperative. I think taking our mental health extremely fucking seriously and preciously is imperative. And not putting all of our eggs on making them like me or accept me or let me in or embrace me we spend a lot of energy doing that because it helped us survive, but at a certain point, it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving, and we have to learn to advocate for ourselves and not wait.
Yeah.
I thought those statistics were interesting. I would be interested to know what region of the country they came from, or, because it's not necessarily my personal narrative. Before, getting on 20s, I substitute taught. And personally dealing with children, I felt that they were a lot more liberal in thought, and that they were being exposed to more eclectic people, and that their parents were more in tune with society. But I mean, also living in LA, we can be in a bubble, sometimes, and kind of be inadvertently ignorant to the rest of the world and society and how we're viewed. I had a student, after we finished shooting the show, I got a little restless and went back and substitute taught for a couple days. And I was supposed to do a week, I did 3 days. It was like, the patience ain't the same, But yeah, I had a student on the last day that I was there asked to speak to me after class, and she was a 7th grader, and she wanted to speak to me about the fact that she liked girls, but for the first time she was liking a little boy. And, she wanted to know if that was okay. And she, they have access to us now. They can follow me on Instagram. They can see my life. She knew, and I thought it was significant because growing up, I had to figure stuff out on my own. I had to try to run across things to help me figure out why I was feeling the way that I was feeling and why I was having the thoughts I was having. And I thought it was pretty significant that she could come to me and openly feel like she could speak to an adult and find guidance. And that was something that I wasn't given the same autonomy to have as a child. So I don't know. Those statistics are interesting. I mean, it would just depend on your personal experience and everything. But I feel like, contingent upon where you are, society is getting more accepting as long as you're normalizing it yourself,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think, that's on, okay. Hey, so, I mean, I think everyone pretty much said what I was thinking, but I just think that it's important that, like you were saying, that we do continue to just not to wait, you know what I mean, to wait for the gatekeepers to give us those opportunities, and to represent ourselves. And so I think just creating our own projects and writing our own narratives and stuff like that, and just sort of being that representation for those kids and for those people to see. So, yeah.
So I guess I'm going to say something a little controversial about all of this, or maybe not controversial. Weird to be on a panel with my last girlfriend.
You just couldn't
About
help
LGBT.
yourself.
I mean, it's really, we've never done a panel
I'm sure
together.
other people have done that.
But, it is interesting. I'm your last boyfriend too, right?
Yes,
Yeah, okay,
yes.
so. Just
It's all
checking.
confirmed.
That data and the methodology is BS. And it's BS for a couple of reasons in terms of how both social science and advocacy works, right? At the height of the movement for the fight for LGBT equality was deeply funded, we also saw a rise in hate crimes because visibility sort of brings people out of their shells. And so the thing about sort of Trumpism that is happening in this country is it gives people permission to say things that they've always thought. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that accepting it's going down. It's maybe that people are just being more honest, right? I oftentimes get questions about the sort of rise in videos of black people being harmed by police, and people sometimes say, oh, there's a rise in police violence. Well, there's not a rise in police violence. There's a rise in us being aware of police violence. There's a rise in the visibility of that. And so oftentimes, the sort of visibility of issues, the visibility of people sort of brings folks out of their shell. It's why we can't mistake our presence for power. It's why we can't mistake visibility, awareness, people talking about our stories, shout-outs from the stage as the ability to actually change the rules. And so there are written rules and there are unwritten rules. And all of that has to be part of how we change sort of the circumstances that we're in. And at the end of the day, we can't be driven by polls or focus groups or sort of all of that sort of, all those metrics that can oftentimes define our campaigns. And far too often, whether it's LGBT politics, progressive politics, or what have you, we sort of do the polling, and then we then let the polling define what we ask for, what we demand, and what our sort of vision is. I'm not married, but I know some people who are like wedding planners, right? And so just like I wouldn't have a pollster develop my narrative for the future, I wouldn't have a wedding planner write my vows. And so far too often on our side as well, we have sort of pollsters write our vows, write our narratives. And so to the extent that our work has to be aspirational, our ability to tell the stories we need to tell has to be about what we really want, not just what we think people will accept. That is how we not only change written rules of policy, but how we fight for a different type of culture, which changes the unwritten rules.
You know, I love that because I think that often, one, I think that following polling is much like following tea leaves, right? Like, I don't shake a magic 8-ball and ask, who's gonna win the Democratic nomination. I'm sure the 8-ball would be able to tell me better than the pollsters would at this current point. But I do think that it's important when we have these conversations about gatekeepers, which was echoed throughout the response to the first question, and this idea of every time that there is a conversation about diversity and the need for more diversity, it always goes back to a pipeline. Well, we need a pipeline. It doesn't matter whether it's LGBT, whether it is progressive, whether it's Black, it's always, we just need a pipeline. And I recently, was at a dinner, and it was said that we don't need a pipeline because we have people that are working in writing rooms. We have people that are ushering other folks along. But by the time that they get to the top, by the time that they get to the gatekeeper, there's nobody in the room that looks like them. And so for you all who've had really successful projects that have been greenlit, what do we do about the top, right? Because it isn't about the top, it isn't, to me anyway, about the pipeline from the bottom up, but it's about by the time that you get to that space and you are in a room sitting with a bunch of straight white men, right, who are then deciding whether or not this is going to be mainstream, whether or not it's going to resonate with everybody. What do you do then? And so I'm gonna punt that question to you, Justin, first.
I mean, for me, I don't know. And where I've gotten my sanity from is to stop looking so much at the top and looking at where I am. And because I'm a pipeline of one. I know it's fucking important to me to have a room that's filled with women and queer people and people of color, to put people behind the camera to direct my show that wouldn't get a shot on other shows. And when they get that shot on my show and they look to me to say, what do you want me to do? And I say, be yourself and give me all of you. That's what I want. That's all I can do. Because if I focus too much on what they want, then it sort of gets into my head. Again, it's like I'm eating their fear. I'm eating their shit. You know what I'm saying? And I'm apologizing for myself before I even walk into the room. And I think sometimes we feel like because we're not at the quote-unquote top, where we are isn't important. But I know for a fact that the writer's room that I created and the sort of the atmosphere on my sets that I really work hard to create for my directors that come through, maybe that's 1 out of 50 experiences that they have that year that are good. I mean, so many writers come to my room, and it's not about me. I just think this is what we all should be doing. But so many writers in my room come to me and be like, yo, I worked on that show, this show, that show, and I almost quit the business. Like, thank God you're normal. And thank God you care about how we feel just coming to work every day. And thank God you're not sort of taking on their shit and trying to squeeze me into the box so that you don't get in trouble. Because that's important. I think the advice of like, it's not just about looking up, it's about looking around, really has been my personal saving grace, because the communities that we create, no matter where we are, will eventually rise to the top. This is a long process, maybe longer than we wish. I know it's longer than I wish it was. Yeah. There's so many times when I'm like, damn, we're still here? I feel that so much, but I think that that's just life, man. It takes time, and if what we have right now is whether it's a writer's room or it's a workshop at your house with your friends on the script you're working on, or it's your web series, or it's your podcast, whatever it is, wherever you are, make it the way you think it should be everywhere. And eventually, in success, that'll become more and gradually become more and more what it is as you and your community rise to the top. But I think building community and making space for yourself where you are, that's helped me get to where I am.
Elegance, do you have a thought?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because, a couple of years ago I had a TV show, My House, and, I created that show. I made a short film called Walk For Me that was totally my point of view, right? And that film played a lot of festivals, and then I used that film to make an introduction into Viceland because, honestly, to be quite honest with you, I was at a point, film school, I was seeing the end of the road with that, and I was like, I could do porn or I could do Viceland. And I was like, and I ended up doing Viceland. And when I got to the network, it was kind of, it was weird because the executives, gratefully I had some great executives close to me. My development executive, Harlan Lual, young black man, was kind of my first line of defense. And then Naomi Leidner, wonderful woman who's got a really great track record. And then they would take the stuff that we would talk about together and then go off into this other room. And I was never allowed to go in that room. I didn't have an email to that room. I didn't have a phone number to that room. I would just know that it would be like, it was like directing actors in a way, like I'd have to give them the script. Okay, this is what you say. And like, well, what if they say this? They say that. And like, and after about maybe 6 months of this, I'm like, wait, can I go in the room and maybe speak for myself? And they were like, nah, they don't want to hear from you. And I just let it go because I thought I didn't want to mess it up. I didn't want to mess up the opportunity. So I guess like, when it all comes down to it, what I've learned from that experience is that it's like, to echo what Justin is saying, it's very important to build up the people that are around you, the people who actually believe in you and the people who actually F with what you do. Because those are your line of defense when you get into these rooms where everyone's straight, white, and male and don't understand a word that you're saying. You need those people who do understand what you're saying so that you're not just the leaky faucet in the corner, the black leaky faucet in the corner that's irritating people by kind of annoying them by bringing up this stuff. Now it's not just you saying it. There's 3 other people saying it. And it's important to, I've learned to share the power, the little tiny bit of power I have. I'm always trying to figure out a way to siphon it off to my collaborators as well, so that when they're in the room with me, they're able to sit somewhere around where I'm sitting, and it's not so easy to just overlook what we're doing. In terms of the executives themselves, there needs to be more programs. There's a lot of focus on getting young people of color and women into the directing and writing and acting and all these other kind of tracks, but when it comes to the business of it, the finance, where the money is coming from, that room that I was not allowed into, we are not there enough. And it has to be an agenda from us to get us in those rooms. In institutions like Sundance and Film Independent, there need to be programs that go to undergrad college students who are not in the entertainment business, but who have leadership skills, and we need to be showing them the value that they could have in this world so that the numbers shake out. Because Oscar So White was 6 years ago, and I've realized that the people who are in charge of fixing that are the same people who are the ones who made it that way, and it's just like, there is no progress. There is no movement. There are the same people. The network executive, their main intention is to stay employed. That's it. It is not to revolutionize the way we see each other. It is not to reach hearts and minds and make people, trans accepting and black accepting. The idea is to stay employed. So as long as they're trying to stay employed, anything that feels like they can't explain it in the rooms we can't go in is a no.
So much there. It's funny because you say Oscar So White was 6 years ago and yet trending again, because we have an award show season coming around where you have categories that are still all white. And it's baffling to me, as somebody that is outside of the industry watching all of this happen, because there are shows and films and documentaries and so many more stories done for and by people of color, and yet the invisibility is still there as if folks don't exist. And so, I mean, you answered a part of it, but I want to allow, other folks to kind of jump in, which is, part of it is people saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be participating in, in these kinds of awards that don't see us. And we need to, create our own, like GLAAD has the media awards and, and NAACP has the image awards and all of these things. And maybe we need to do more of that. But I'm like, that is important, yes, because many films, actors get recognized that they don't get recognized at these places. But how do you really, truly fix a system that is trying to be fixed by people who broke it purposefully in the first place?
Well, I don't know if they broke it. The system is actually operating exactly the way it was designed to operate. And I do think that it's important for us to sort of diagnose the problem the right way. I couldn't agree with you more in terms of how the system is set up. And it's the difference between seeing inequality as unfortunate, like it's a car accident, like it sort of just happened, and then as a result, we sort of charity our way out of it. We do mentorship programs. We do all of these things to sort of fix the people and prop up the people who have been hurt or harmed by the systems, or do we see inequality as unjust and we actually fix the system and we concentrate our energy on the system? We will never mentor Black and brown queer people to freedom. Like, we never will. Like, because the structures are not designed that way. We either work to build the type of power to fix the system, or what we will get is blips that allow us to get comfortable with the status quo, and then stuff just goes right back to where it was before. And that's how systems are constantly designed to keep us in place. We did a study with UCLA back in 2017 on race in the writers' rooms, and really looked at the range of writers' rooms, and 66% of writers' rooms on TV had not one Black writer. Out of all the crime procedures that year on TV, only one, all set in cities, only one of them had more than 2 Black writers. They're all covering crime and punishment inside of cities. They have law enforcement people on the books as crime experts. That's not a mistake. That's not some sort of accident. That is by design. It is set up that way. And so it is also important that we think about all the ways that we are forcing and pushing the system. It's also important that for groups like mine that we are listening to creatives. We are working to push on the system in ways that are going to be supportive, working to figure out ways to do that. And part of the project we have at Color of Change, and I see some of my staff, you should raise your hands so that folks can see you, is Tell Black Stories. And for us, Tell Black Stories for us is at the intersection of Blackness at the intersection. Color of Change, the racial justice organization, thinks about Blackness at the intersection of a lot of different experiences: women, LGBT, immigration. I'm the openly gay leader of a racial justice organization, and so I take that very seriously, the intersection. But the responsibility for us to diagnose the problem correctly and not spend our time trying to placate systems, because regardless of the system, I hear the same thing in Silicon Valley. We just need pipelines. That is the problem. We just need to help more people of color be ready for these jobs. And they'll say it's stem cell jobs, it's the STEM jobs that Black people are not ready for, when only 15% of the jobs in most of these companies are actually STEM jobs. They can't find Black people to work in HR or be lawyers or marketing or anything else. And so we will constantly get reasons where the system will tell us that we have to fix something about ourselves to be ready for systems that were never designed for us. Our responsibility is to both build the power to fight back, and then, of course, obviously, support the programs that give people an opportunity to close all of the gaps. And those gaps are also by design. Systemic exclusion that prevents, that creates a different tiered education system in this country. Systemic exclusion that creates different type of access to opportunities. All of those things are important, but I just don't want any of us who think about and care about equality and equity to walk out this room thinking that the people we are trying to fix are the people who are hurt and harmed by these systems. If we are not focused on challenging and fighting those systems, then we are only doing the work to hold those systems up.
So let me say, well, I think that it's trash, right? Like, let's just talk, right? So this whole award season, I mean, I've been so disappointed because, I mean, I'm only 29, but I mean, I know that this diversity thing has always been an issue, and so it's just like, okay, so I went to the Creative Arts Emmys last year, right? And it was just like a bunch of white people, like, giving a bunch of white people awards. And it was just so boring. And I was just like, I mean, it's trash. Like, it's so unfortunate, right? Because, I mean, I like the business, but it's just like, at what point? Like, how do we change this? So if it means that, you know, the Academy is like a bunch of white people and only a few people of color, it's like, then maybe we don't let the Academy decide who gets to be nominated for these awards. Maybe we select a committee which is committed and has, you know, a certain percentage of black people and Asian and Latino people. So I don't know. It's just so disappointing to think that we haven't really come anywhere. And that's why, and I was just talking to Justin and I was saying I'm just so grateful for people like him and Lena who are making, you know, projects and films that are really redefining, you know, black art, you know, because we always see the same slave narrative. You know, those are, I mean, Harriet's nominated for an Oscar this year, another slave narrative, and you know, that's cool, but we've done that already, okay? Like Queen and Slim was out this year. There was a bunch of other movies that were out that really deserve to, you know, be recognized. So I think that, I mean, I don't know how we change it. I'm just an actor. I tell jokes. You know, I don't know, but you know, I just think that maybe that's a good idea, right? Like maybe there's a maybe we don't let actors vote for other actors if it's not fair, because we have to start reflecting what people are seeing in the world. And seeing a bunch of white people giving white people awards and recognizing the same top 5 boring movies that nobody saw is just trash.
I hope sometime that you will form an opinion and tell people how you feel. But picking up on those very important points, how do we turn what oftentimes feels like a Black Renaissance moment, right? Like right now, there are so many creators, actors, stories, narratives that are being told. And I always get really excited because I'm a child of the 90s and I get like, ooh, we're gonna be back, y'all, it's gonna be great. And then poof, it goes, right? And what do you feel it's going to take for there to be sustainability, that these moments are not just poof moments, that they really are movements that continue to gain ground year after year after year? Because frankly, to your point, yeah, watching a room full of white people give other white people awards, I'm not really that into, right? And so, and it's not because folks are not talented, and that's not what I'm saying, it's just like, there is just so much more that is out there. There's just so much more that is interesting and layered and nuanced, and why can't we celebrate that? So, you know, what do you all think that it will take to go from that? And Jojo, I want to start with you because you're a part of a new show that is, there should be like thousands of those shows that have told the stories of what it's like to be Black and growing up and finding yourself and, you know, and navigating life and all of that. And yet, there isn't, right? So, what are your thoughts?
I think a little different, I guess, from the 90s would be that, you know, there are not many at all. This is one thing we speak about in the show, but there aren't that many. But there are a few people of color in positions where they can greenlight shows and create more opportunities. And I think that that's really going to be significant, you know, like Alexandra said, my bad. Alexandra said, Justin and Lena are two individuals who are creating lanes for people and creating opportunities. And it just has to be a domino effect. It has to be people turning around, reaching behind them, creating opportunities, creating lanes, speaking up, being confident about what you believe in and the art that you want to present. So yeah, I think that Black people, you know, if you saw this Google commercial recently that they played during the Grammys, I mean, we pretty much create the wave, you know?
It gave me so much
we
life,
the
that
coolest
commercial.
kids at the school. So I don't really see, it's like, you know, it's like Black people literally came to America and lost everything and had to create an entire culture, create a music style, create a language, create dance, create, you know, all different types of things. Like, I don't see us losing our creative juices anytime soon because it's something that's just in us, you know, even going back to, I mean, the first time I went to Ghana, I saw so many, you know, similarities between me and those people, and we are on a completely different continent, you know, it's just something that's in our genetics. So I don't see it as something that'll waver as long as, you know, we hold our positions in power where we can control the influence on the business side. Because that's really what it is. It's about numbers, it's about money, you know. It's about influence, and yeah, like, you know, we have to retain and obtain control in that regard.
I also think we have to hold our billionaire class much more accountable, even though there's so few of them. They need to be much more accountable for the type of content that they're making that depicts us, and for the absolute necessity that they put their capital behind depicting us, even when they don't agree with what they're depicting. You know, I've been doing a lot of labs recently, talking to financiers, and it's incredible to me that one white man billionaire who writes the check for 10 of your favorite Black movies, and to not know and then say, like, oh, this is all it takes. If I sit down in front of this person and I pitch them and they're compelled by what I'm saying, they could just write a check and make my movie. And every time I'm doing that, it's with someone white. And I know for a fact that there are Black people who have this kind of capital, and they don't seem to be. I think education is everything. I'm a big proponent of education. And I think the patronage model that comes out of Western Europe, right, from the Renaissance down to today, this idea of like very powerful families who view creating artwork as a way of directing the masses, right? That system, because of the history that we have as Black people in this hemisphere, we have not had an opportunity to understand what to do with great wealth once you have great wealth. You know, and I think that education is essential, and I think it starts with just trying stuff out. You know, there's a lot of people getting paid a lot of money to play sports and entertain white folks, and they don't get to say what's on their mind politically. But that doesn't mean they can put their money where their mind is and give us the support we need to say it for them and to our world.
I also think, look, I think there's something to be said too. A lot of the work is outward leaning, but there's some inward work to be done too. I don't think a lot of us are aware of our own trauma, if I'm being honest. Like the shit that we had to endure to be who we are and to hold our heads up high and to make it to a place like Sundance. Like, not all of us make it to the journey because we have to cut a lot of parts of ourselves off, and we're not conscious of it. And I mean, I see it online where we're not just all lifting each other up. We're tearing the fuck, we're tearing ourselves down at the same time, licking our chops doing it, not constructively. And I'm not saying that to sort of put shame on anybody. I feel like there's also a freedom of expression that's happening online that's very exciting, but I see a lot of undealt with trauma too, and sort of shadow projection. I know there's a lot for a panel to get into shadow projection, but a lot of our shame and a lot of our fear of failure and a lot of our pain over not being seen by the rest of them, we throw that on each other a lot. And I think that part of it is not letting it get in our heads and when we get into those rooms where there's nobody like us and nobody hears us and nobody sees us, I certainly have the tendency of taking all of that on and eating it and feeling less than, and as I walk through the rest of the world. And that ekes its way into my art, it ekes its way into my commentary, it ekes its way into my relationships, and I am the only one who can be responsible for that. And I think, like, the mental health thing is not just a saying. Like, we, especially as queer people, add on to it if you're a queer person of color, we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves in ways that nobody else will. Maybe not even our parents could, you know? So that's just one thing I want to say. I think some of the work is inward.
Yeah, I think that there is because there is so much to unpack and there is so much work that we all try and do on a regular basis, that when art is created where you get to see yourself reflected, if you don't see that, then the trigger reaction to that is then let me tear it down, right? Is that you have so little, right, that is out there that is representative of all of our varied lived experiences that when you don't see it all encompassed, it's like it must be trash, right? And so where white people get to have only, because there's so much, they get to show pieces, right? We need to show everything. And I think that is traumatic, right? I think that there is something to be said about having to bleed of all of your experience, whether it's in film, it's in writing, it's in commentary or what have you, to expose that, right? Because it's like, see me, see me, see me. So I definitely understand, especially, and I will say this as somebody who works in politics and feels that they have to see and be all of the things all of the time without having the moment to take space before you tell people about what's going on and the trauma that is happening. I think that mental health and self-care is incredibly important, and Audre Lorde told us that it was a revolutionary act. And I think now more than ever that that's something that we all really need to unpack. The next question that I have for you all is that just trending in the political space, because I can't help myself. In these dark times that we are living in, what do you think is the responsibility of storytellers to reflect the moment that we are living in, to tell the stories, to reflect the experiences that, frankly, our government is trying to invisibilize? Do you think that storytellers have a responsibility or not? Is it just to make good art and that's where we should rest it? And anyone can take that.
This is actually a really tricky question, and you know, as a person who kind of sits on the outside, I spent 6 years as head of programs at GLAAD, then took over Color of Change. I have like operated in this space as an advocate, pushing the industry for years, and also trying to support and engage creatives. And it is like a tricky line of like, what do we expect out of people who's should also have a responsibility to tell the stories that are authentic to them. But we, as everyone has talked about, we can't take out that there's a whole capitalist structure behind this that is pulling levers and making rules, that what we get at the end is not some sort of pure reflection of, or very rarely is some pure reflection of someone's like original intention. It is through a whole set of avenues and gatekeepers that it ends up getting to us, and sometimes very, very good and sometimes very bad. We just released this report on Crime TV. We worked with USC for a year, and we looked at the representation of race and the representation of crime, and we disaggregated the data on sort of how black folks were portrayed. There's a whole lot of great data. You can get it at changehollywood.org. That is not the sort of message. I mean, one of the things about the show those shows that's really sort of both funny and tragic is that if you ever watch those shows, CSI, Law & Order, there's way more black judges that ever existed in the real world. I mean, if there were like that many black judges, like it would say something different about our education system and equality and justice. But black people are used as symbolic symbols for white writers' rooms to send justice oftentimes through the mouths of elderly, stately black folks without a backstory, without intention. What would it be like for a black woman in her 60s to actually be a judge? What she might actually think about the criminal justice system? But they're sort of oftentimes stand-ins. Dick Wolf, who is the kind of one of the creators of this genre, Law and Orders, the Chicago shows, all of those shows. He is the kind of master. At the television critics up front, when he was asked about these shows, and sort of did he feel any responsibility for the sort of how it portrays, and sort of there's like a lot of deep, challenging stuff from the ways that Black women and brown women are never portrayed as victims on those shows, to the ways in which trans women are portrayed on those shows, maybe 1 or 2 episodes a season, oftentimes, once again, with no backstory, no intention. He said his shows are apolitical. So you have to be living behind a gate in this country. You have to just have a lot of people serving you. You have to have your TV off and not seeing people taking to the streets proclaiming Black Lives Matter. You have to have not seen pushes for criminal justice reform. You have not had to see videos of Black and brown people being harmed on video and juries letting those police officers off to say that your content is apolitical. But that is what happens when we actually don't hold creatives accountable. And when we think it is just like people should just be able to put out whatever art. Because at the end of the day, the capitalist structures have put a price tag on what is acceptable and what is not. And so many of our communities are at the end result are gonna be challenged. And so someone can make tons and tons of money off of putting our communities constantly in harm's way, because for the last 20 years in this country, violent crime has steadily went down. At the same time, most Americans believe that violent crime has gone up. That gap between perception and reality is exactly why content and creativity matters. It means that certain people are prioritized as victims' rights advocates because they are shown as victims and other people are not. It means that certain people will always be the hero in our stories and other people will always be the victims. It means that a police officer who steps out of his responsibility and hurts or harms someone but is given a great speech about why he or she had to do it because the ends justifies the means, that means it puts us in harm's way. So the advocacy to challenge these systems and push on these systems is not about holding back creativity. It is about being honest about all the systems and structures that give us the content that we see on the air and not pretending like it is just some sort of clear path that a multi-millionaire can depict our cities and our communities in all sorts of ways and then stand on a stage, collect his check, and say it is apolitical and walk home while our communities have to suffer the damage. It is not apolitical, and those who think it is need to be held accountable.
Well, I'm actually on a Dick Wolf series, Chicago Med, and I play a transgender person. I am trans. It's supposed to be a recurring role, and maybe I don't want to say too much because I don't want to get fired. But, well, it was supposed to be a recurring role. Okay, we're going to talk about it, Unapologetic. Okay. So I was supposed to be recurring on that show, and I've shot 2 episodes in 4 seasons. So that everything you're saying is very true, I guess, right? Because I don't really have a storyline. I think first I had prostate cancer, and then the next time my boyfriend was whooping my ass all over Chicago. So yeah, it's unfortunate, right? But I think that it is important that we kind of reflect what's going on in the world. And I think myself as a trans person and an artist, like my purpose in life, like at first it was like, ooh, I really want to be an actress. I want to be famous and stuff. But then it was like, okay, that's boring. Like, what is your purpose in life? And I feel like if your purpose isn't to change the fucking world or to make somebody else's journey easier, it's like, why are you doing it? You know what I mean? So now I feel so much more fulfilled because I know that every time I walk onto a set or walking onto this stage right now, that I'm hoping to put something out there in the world that is going to help the next person make it, and I just hope the next generation of people do the same. So I think it's really important that us as filmmakers, as writers, that we do reflect. And I think Black people have been doing that in our projects. We do try to reflect what's going on. So we just need more.
I love it. Thank you for setting up the last question that I was going to have for everybody, which is we're going to open it up to questions. So it's my last question. It's not yours. So, what do each of you, in a sentence or so, what do each of you want to see more of in Hollywood? And what do you think it will truly take to change the face of Hollywood? And I'm going to go from Alexandra and work up.
Well, what I want to see more of is obviously more trans people.
Yes.
So, you know, I do. I mean, I just want to see more of everybody, right? But I think for me, I'd like to see more trans women of color, because far too many of my sisters are being murdered every single day in this country, and nobody talks about it. And it's a real problem, right? And I always say this, like, I could walk out of here and I could go be murdered as a black trans woman. It don't matter what I look like or who I think I am or any of that. It's like, that's the reality. So I just want to see more trans women and trans women of color and trans folk. If that means they got to be on TV, if that means they got to be in movies, they got to be models and writers, I want to see them in every single aspect of the world, so that hopefully, I'm hoping, right? I'm on Empire, right? And so I'm hoping that people are watching that and they're seeing that and they're being like, oh, she's normal, you know, she's singing, she's interacting with people, she's deserving of every single thing everybody else is deserving of. And so that's just what I want to see more of.
Thank you. Jojo.
I think for me, I just, you know, kind of backtracking off of what you were saying, I kind of want to see more normalcy of being uniquely you, you know, whatever that may be, black, white, gay, straight, Hispanic, Asian, you know, transgender, whatever, you know, the case may be. I think that with the normalization of intertwining demographics of people, you know, people will become more understanding and empathetic to people's differences. That's really what I'm looking forward to. It's just seeing it in a normal, in a way that it's not so much highlighted as different. You know what I'm saying? It's just, you can be uniquely you. And you know, piggybacking off of what Elegance said, I think that that's going to take, like you said, people investing, especially people of color in the community who have amassed such large amounts of fortune. You know, you're right. I think, you know, when you're a first generation millionaire, billionaire, you might be a little scared to spend your money, even though, you know, you probably ain't gonna spend it all, you know. But it's understandable, you know. However, I do think it's gonna take a collaborative effort throughout the community to establish a foundation and lasting stance within the industry.
I want to see more risks taken. I feel like, look, I feel like sometimes I go to art to be comforted, and I want my opium, and I just want to feel good and, you know, get my little reality situation in. But I do feel like people of color and queer people especially, like, we are punished for taking risks and for taking big swings. And I feel like, particularly in like the cinephile community, white filmmakers and white audiences have become accustomed and have an appetite to go to the movies or to turn on the TV and be challenged by the work. And I feel like for us sometimes, that appetite isn't really there always in the audience. It's not, and it's definitely not there at the executives, at the executive level. And sometimes, you know, artists can be afraid to really take a big swing, but I want to see some weird fucking shit coming. That's what I want. Yeah. I want to go to the theater and be like, what the fuck was that? You know what I mean? Yeah. And I feel like when we take big swings, we're really hard on ourselves. And that's just, I don't know. When I pay my money and show up and I'm looking up at a big screen, I want something that's just gonna like be something I haven't seen before. And I don't want us to be so scared and so in our boxes and trying to sort of get on and make it through the system and the tunnels and the pipelines that have been made for us that we're not taking challenges.
Nice.
You took my answer, Justin.
You could say it again. It could be two of us that want it.
I guess what I want to see more of is two things. I want to see more critique of Christianity in black cinema. Oh. It has not happened enough. It feels like everything I see that has black people in it, they just believe that white Jesus will save them. They don't seem to ever think about the fact that this belief in Jesus has been indoctrinated into us through violence and slavery, and and the idea that so much of what I think the problems are derived from this notion that a God is going to come from heaven. And I just want to see somebody ask those questions. I ask those questions in my work. I want to see more people do that. And in terms of meaningful change, we have to own the means of production, point blank period. If it's not, the more and more I'm around the kind of elite air of this business, the more it seems that there's a precious handful, a very small amount of people in this business who actually have relationships with capital. A lot of people act like they do, but most of them don't really. And now those relationships with capital, once you get to who has that relationship, you will be able to just work right down the line and figure out how whoever you like or admire got to where they're at through that person. So if it's that simple, we need to start being much more intentional in how we align ourselves as a community of creatives with capital.
I love this idea of being able to take big risks and be able to take creative risk. And that's in many ways why we launched the Tell Black Stories campaign at Color of Change, because it's not just about telling more stories that have us in it, but it's telling more stories that are specific, that are creating, that it's intentional, recognizing that we come from a variety of different experiences. I totally agree with the idea that, like, wow, there's like another slave movie that's coming up. But the fact of the matter is that also should not be a big deal, because how many movies that are about World War II that we have to see every single year with white boys saving, like, the planet? And so we should have enough stories where we should have multiple slave movies, because quite frankly, people do forget that slavery happened because they're having their weddings on plantations and celebrating about, like, that these are like great places where commerce and innovation happened, not where people were beat, raped, and killed. And so, I think that it's just deeply important that we are building the infrastructure and challenging the infrastructure so we can tell as many stories. So one story is not our only consequential sort of story. Each year we don't have to import everything in. Every single black character and every single archetype doesn't have to be in every single story, but we can have a creativity, we can have an array of those stories. And that, for me, is what we need more of. And we actually don't get more of that, and I totally appreciate your point that we actually have to both own the means of production, and we have to build power to challenge the current means of production, to create infrastructure that makes those in power nervous about the fight that we will push, force them to have to stand up and do something different, create consequences for those that traffic our images and traffic our stories without consequence. That is the work that we have to do if we want something different. And then we also, quite frankly, have to be willing to support the risk takers. We have to be willing to show up on the first weekend and the second weekend. And we have to be willing to tell our friends. And if the story doesn't do every single thing we want it to, we still have to help those stories get more traction and more legs, because that also is important. We can't just say we want these stories and then sit at home when creatives take risks and not actually support them and show up and engage and have dialogue about it. All of that is the type of work that we have to collectively do. And I just believe that there's always, in these conversations I'm in, there's a lot of nodding heads, but there's sometimes not enough moving feet. And so I think the question for all of us as we walk out of this room is, if you are nodding your head, what is your commitment when you leave the room to move your feet, to open your wallet, to open your network, and to do something different than you were doing yesterday?
Okay. So if you have questions, hands up, and there is a microphone. Okay, so this person right here, a black sweatshirt. Wait 1 second. Oh, good, you're a projector.
Yeah, my name is Christian, and I guess this question has two parts to it. When you talk about the Oscars and just how, it's an academy that's all white men, and we know that, and we know they're just gonna keep voting for their own. Why do we have so much emotional stock in it? Are we seeking validation?
It's not emotional.
Yeah,
it's
it's financial.
It's financial.
Yeah,
Okay.
for instance, my feature debut, I'm in the midst of writing and getting finance right now, right? And it's a drama about a homeless kid joins the Marine Corps to change his life, and then has to conceal his attraction to his drill instructor in order to survive. boot camp, right? So the lead character is black and gay. And what I have understood kind of in the ether of all this is that if I don't set out the intention of winning awards with this film, then a film that already feels very difficult to make becomes that much more impossible to make. And then further down the line, when we look at like how we know white men earn $1, white women earn 75 cents, black women earn 64 cents on that dollar, black men, if you could get the job, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And like that, all of that plays into every industry in America, including Hollywood. So having an Oscar nomination, having Oscars on your shelf can be the thing that ensures that you're not consistently underpaid, because the thing about it is all of this has a dollars and cents consequence. These executives understand that when black people, queer people, trans people, disabled people come in, that if you by whatever reason feel compelled by their idea enough to say yes, they know, they believe deep down inside that you can't go anywhere else and get what you deserve. So they will offer you half of what you're worth and act like they're doing you a favor. But if you have that Oscar nomination or that Golden Globe or that not MTV award, that matters to me. but if you have that on your resume, then all of a sudden you're able to come into an equitable financially. But I agree. But it's all white supremacy ultimately.
Yeah.
We're all buying into a system that makes us feel like we're less than, even the white people.
Yeah, I don't think everyone has that understanding. But the other part of the question is, so I understand, Rashad, you're talking about preparing people and mentoring them to fight against the system. But what's to stop non-white people from creating something new, like something outside of Hollywood? Like what's to stop that?
Absolutely, and our folks are. But the way systems and structures are worked, we're not gonna shoot our way out of the system. We are not going to buy our way out of the system. That's just not the history of how social movements work and win, right? There are systems and structures in place, and we are not going to trick our way out of capitalism. Like, we're not going to somehow and so if we are not actually also building advocacy structures to change the fundamental rules, we're not going to trick our way. Will never be a person that will say, don't build your own, don't advocate for your own. But also, we should be clear when the rules are set up and designed to make us fail, that we also have to change those rules as well. Because if we are not doing both, what will end up happening is that we will get to a certain level. We will get to a certain position, and all the structures will fail, because presence doesn't mean power. A black president doesn't mean that we end structural racism. A black celebrity that announces she's pregnant and stops the internet doesn't mean that that America loves black people as much as it loves black culture. In fact, it can hate black people and love black culture at the same time, exploit black culture as has been doing for years, and all those things can work hand in hand. And so my sort of point here is not that we don't build our own, it's that we can't also ignore the systems and the structures that are designed to constantly put the status quo in place. Because if we do, then we are building our castles on land that we know climate change is just going to rush water over, and we are investing that in with not an understanding of all the ways and all the limitations to that. And so it is a yes and, but I constantly will get people saying, well, why do you care about whether or not black people are getting awards for these structures? Because I'm like, the awards are set up to then reflect back the system as it is. And so what it will do is it'll say, well, these shows by black creatives don't travel, and so now they can't be creative. They don't win awards. And so an award for a certain movie could mean $10 million, $15 million more. It just doesn't mean more for that creative. It means that 3 or 4 more other things might get greenlit as a result, or someone may actually be able to get into the room. It means that other people on that production who may have been sort of secondary or third in line on that production may have an opportunity to move something because of their connection to something that was award-winning. When structures are designed to limit our ability to move up and move beyond, we also have to fight those structures even while we build our own. I think it's a yes and.
My question, I really wanted to say I appreciate the Audre Lorde quote about the systems and the tools not being able to be used to dismantle the master's house. But something that I'm thinking about as you all have been talking is this idea of how oftentimes black folks, and I don't come for me, but if you do, make sure you're ready. Black folks don't want freedom, they want privilege. And so a lot of the experiences I've even had navigating the industry, I've noticed that there has been this issue around black folks kind of playing the gatekeeper and me not being able to get past them. So how do you think about navigating that in your own careers? And what advice would you have to someone who is in this room trying to navigate both white supremacy, respectability politics, and anti-blackness in the system as a whole? How do you overcome that in your own career or in your work?
All right,
Your question was an answer.
I don't have an answer. I don't know. Okay? I literally am going to call my therapist after this panel. We have a 7:30 phone appointment, okay? I think what you said is brilliant, though, that sometimes, but I think part of it is we're conditioned to want privilege and not freedom. I think it's a question of consciousness and trying to figure out, like, what is it that has me to aspire to get past that gate in the first place? You know, for me, I try to make work that raises consciousness, that sort of brings up things that people maybe aren't ready to deal with. And I think, I think your question had an answer in it for me. That maybe I need to stop seeking privilege. I need to start seeking freedom more often and in more areas in my life. I know for me, what makes me fulfilled is being able to give opportunity to people. And I know that I've run into a lot of people who are my heroes, who aren't as interested in letting me through the door that they open for me. And all I can say to that is that I've got to be different to the people who come to me and the people who come to try to walk through the door that maybe I helped open. So thank you.
I would say that's an interesting point in that it's definitely something that can be applicable to all different types of industries. You know, before I was on my right path, I've tried to get jobs, and then I got to the one black person who's the regional manager, and they don't give me the job. And I'm like, damn, bruh. You know what I'm saying? Like, I done got through all these white folk, and I get to your black ass, and you say no, you know? It's disheartening, you know? I think, like Justin said, though, you have to hold yourself accountable once you get to those. And we have to see, you know, as black people, we have to stop thinking in lack and see an abundance of wealth out there for everybody. And not just like, if you come, you are now taking from me, you know, but knowing that the earth literally supplies riches for us every day and that there's enough in the pot for everyone. I think that once that, you know, we get that mindset down, then hopefully we can move towards, you know, having gatekeepers who are more susceptible to allowing people behind them to walk through.
We have a question over here in the corner.
First of all, I want to, I apologize about the fall. That was a grand entrance, so I apologize for the eyes on me. Anyway, in my background, I produce films. I'm a writer. And I've noticed since probably the last few years, more and more deaf talent, black deaf talent, including in television and acting, but I want to know who is writing these characters. They're hearing people. And for me, it is a problem because they don't really know how we sound, if you understand me. I mean, they don't know. So it's always better for me and for them to collaborate with writers such as myself. It doesn't matter, you know, as a matter of fact, I'm currently in the process of working and developing as an executive of my own TV show. And I'm going into that process. But I want you, the writers, to just keep in mind when you're developing a deaf role, always be open to collaborating with them because, you know, it's just better that way. we know how to reflect ourselves. We don't really see ourselves on TV. Any black, gay, lesbian, trans, deaf, myself, I'm a lesbian, so I know what I sound like. And, I think we all have that same experience. So it's important that we document our voices and the black deaf talent, the creators, who are the most untapped potential talents in Hollywood. So, our voices have been marginalized, overlooked, and we need to shift the focus, and we need to do that this year. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, good. All right. Thank you. Who's there? Okay. In the front. Could you raise your hand so they could see you? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brett Austin Johnson. You, Justin, talked about trauma, and I almost lost it because sometimes we forget we're sitting on it. We've been sitting on it so long. When it comes from places like your home and your school, I'm a senior in college right now at Morehouse College, and while it's doing great progressive things, it's still going through a metamorphosis. How do you rationalize and balance that when these institutions and these facilities have created such a great product of who you are? And does that trauma affect your work? And do you use it in some way? Or is it just a byproduct to get rid of?
I have to use it. I have to own it. I have to love it. I think we're so conditioned to make it that that's our focus, and we create what I would say, I've gone through my life sometimes feeling like I'm in a person-shaped corset. Because there's so many parts of myself that I don't even remember cutting off. And that stuff can show up and feel like it's the outside, but I have to love those parts of me. I have to uncover them. I have to, my boyfriend knows because he sees it. He sees the dirty laundry. And in this industry, like, it can be so inconvenient when your shit starts to come up, when your feelings hurt because, you didn't get the nomination, or you got, someone threw shade on you on Twitter or whatever. That stuff coming up is actually a blessing because it's a part of you that's like, yo, I'm still here too. I know you thought you got rid of me to get over there, but I'm still here. And those parts of us need healing and they need our attention. And it sounds so Pollyanna-ish. And sometimes I struggle to listen to my own advice on this, but we have to learn to love all the parts of ourselves, not just the parts of us that they want, just the parts of us that they deem successful. I think that's the most important work we can do on ourselves. We can't just get rid of it. It's worthy of so much more than that.
So I want you all to join me in thanking this incredible panel, thanking GLAAD and Sundance for putting it together, Alexandra Grey, Rashad Robinson, Gibbs, Justin Simien, Elegance Bratton.